Let's take a look at how to install Flask and how to create a very simple web application using that framework, essentially a hello world. When we get started, we're going to want to create a virtual environment for this project. A virtual environment is essentially like a little container, a sandbox that isolates and separates our work from everything else we're doing in Python so that we don't interfere with our other projects, and so that if we're done and we want to get rid of it, we can delete everything and not have done any permanent changes to our computer. So to get started with that virtual environment, we'll need to create a folder for this project. I'm going to call this one Hello Flask, and then we want to open that in Visual Studio Code, either by dragging and dropping it in there or on the File menu, Open Folder. And I will create a file in this project. I'm going to call it hello.py, and this will also let VS Code know that we're going to be working in Python. And now we want to create that virtual environment. There are a couple ways we can do this. I'm going to just click down in the bottom right corner. It shows our current environment, and we can see that the version of Python we're working in. That will open a drop down at the top. I'm going to say create a virtual environment. We want a VENV, which is a virtual environment, and it will list whatever interpreters you have installed. You may have a different list than mine, but we want the most recent version that you have on your computer. As this sets up our virtual environment, it may also pop up and ask you if you want to select it. You can just say yes. And what I should see is a .venv folder up here, and that venv noted down here in my select environment area. So it looks like I'm good to go, and I can move on with installing Flask. To install Flask, we're going to use a program called pip, P-I-P. And so to do that, I'm going to open a terminal. You could also just hit the run button. That would open you a terminal as well. I'm going to note that over here it says .venv, so I know I'm in that virtual environment. I'm going to just type in the command pip install Flask. And mine probably won't have to download. It's probably got that cached already on there. Yours might take a moment as it downloads all of that work. And once it has finished, then you will have the Flask package, or library package, I guess, on your computer, and you'll be ready to get started. First thing we'll need to do is import from that Flask package that we just installed. So I'll use a from statement so I don't have to qualify my references here. From Flask, import Flask, now with a capital F. So lowercase f here, and what we are importing is the Flask class, and that's what we're going to need to create this web application. And in fact, that's what we'll do on the next line of code. I'm going to create an instance of that Flask class called app. And in order for it to kind of have a reference point for where everything is, I need to pass in this dunder name variable that you've probably seen before when we talked about importing and libraries and modules and all that. So that creates our app that we can use for this web application. The next thing we're going to need to do is probably new to you. We're going to use what's called a decorator, which is this @ symbol. And this decorator is going to set up routing for a URL. Okay, and I'll zoom in. Oops. I'd like to zoom in one more to make that a little bigger, but it's kind of throwing everything out of whack. We're going to set up routing for a URL. And what I put inside, the string that I give it in there to set up this routing is going to be the URL the user types to get to this, to the web page that's going to be associated with this particular routing. And so just putting a slash in there refers to the root of the URL. So in other words, it would be like going to www.australiamountain.edu. If I put something else in there, like employees, then that would be like the addition at the end. We think of it as like a path or a directory, www.australiamountain.edu/employees. What I want for now is just that root URL. And the idea with routing here is that we are going to send the work to a specific function that generates the or renders the HTML page that we want to look at. So I'm just going to call this one home, the home method, and it's going to be just one simple line of code. I'm going to return hello Flask. All right. And I think that should be enough for us to at least get started here. If we hit run, nothing really happens. What we need to do is we need to run this using Flask. And so in my terminal here, I'm going to call the Flask command, and then that's hyphen or minus app. And I need to tell it which app we want to run, and this is a file name. Mine's called hello. And then what do we want to do with that app? We want to run it. So Flask, and then I'm going to use the app argument to say hello is the name of the file I want to run. And then run is the command that I want to execute, essentially. And so I get this message that says, essentially, it's serving the Flask app hello. That's good. We've essentially set up a little server to run on our computer that we can now reach out to with a web browser. And by default, it's going to give us this web address that might be familiar to you if you've done any kind of networking work. 127.0.0.1 is kind of local host. It's your own computer. And then port 5000. And if we open that in a browser, you can just copy and paste it, or I'm going to hit Command and click it. It will open that up in my case, in Safari. And I just zoomed in so we could see it better. There it is, hello Flask. All right, let's go back over to VS Code and see what's going on there. I can see in my terminal here, the web server is still running, and it says I can press Control-C to quit. And then it tells me that there was a web request, a GET request in this case, and it's time-stamped. So that's a log of all the requests that our little server handles. If I go back over to my browser and I hit refresh, nothing really changes there. You saw maybe it flashed quickly across that it was reloading. But I come back and I can see that there was another request. And so all of your requests get logged here. It's a good way to make sure you're doing what you think you're doing. And I'll also point out you may have some other requests there. I think if you're using Chrome, for example, it requests an icon to put on the tab essentially at the top of the browser. And we didn't provide that file, so it can't find it. It's going to return a 404. Chrome will know how to handle that. It doesn't cause any problems. But let's look a little more at this app and this routing that we've created. So I mentioned that we are routing to a URL. If I go into this and I say hello, for example, then what I'm saying is that now I'm routing the URL with a /hello on the end of it. And in order to get this to work correctly, I have to stop and restart my web browser. So I'm going to go down to Terminal and hit Control-C. And I'm going to use the up arrow to run that same command again. And now back to the browser. Hit refresh. And now that's not found because I'm going to the root URL and we're not routing from there. We're not intercepting that, so to speak. But if I add on /hello, there it is. It has now routed me back to that home formula and displayed the text that we were expecting. If I come back and look at my log of requests here, I can see that 404, meaning that I tried to access something that it couldn't find, and so it returned that 404 error. This routing probably appears to the user, they probably think of it as like a path or a subdirectory over in that URL. And that's fine, but notice that we're not that's not a folder for us. It's not the same structure. This is just routing that specific request. A couple other things about the way this route works. Let's add a slash onto the end of it. Oh, sorry, let's not add a slash onto the end of it. Let's go, it's still running. Let's go over here and say hello slash, and that stops working. I added a slash onto that. So I have slash hello slash. And that's potentially problematic. Some people are in the habit of putting slashes on the end, or especially if they're thinking of it as a folder. So what we can do is we can add that to our routing here. And now I'm going to have to hit Control C in the terminal and run this again. Oh, I need to save it as well. You can see up there, it's unsaved. So I'll save it and now run it again. And now I'll load it with that slash on the end again, and it works. But here's what's interesting. If we put that slash on the end, that slash becomes optional. So the URL now works with or without that slash. And then it just sort of redirects it correctly. All right, back over here. I can route multiple URLs to that same function just by adding that decorator for each one. So I'm going to say app route, and I'll add back in that root URL. And so what I'm saying here is that if the user types in the root address or they go to /hello with or without the trailing slash, I want those both to redirect to this home. And I can do that as many times as I want. So if I want to also route /greeting, I can route that. And if I want to confirm that this works, again, I have to save my file, close the web server, run it again, and go back and reload, and I can test those. So this is hello. If I get rid of that, that's just the root. And if I add, I think it was greeting, I forgot what I typed. Greeting, that also seems to work. Let's try greetings with an S. And there's our not found. In fact, we can not only can we route as many URLs as we want to that one function, but we can add routings to other functions, and we can do that as much as we need. So if I want to add routing for goodbye to a different function, I can say /goodbye/, and I like to now put that trailing slash on there because that makes it optional for the user. It'll work either way. And I'm just going to call this function goodbye. And this will return, I guess I'll take this opportunity to point out, I can put tags in here if I want. I'll put h1 goodbye Flask, and I'll close that h1. And then I'll put an h2 just to sort of show that this is working. Have a nice day. And I'll close that heading 2. I'm going to save it. I'm going to exit my web server in the, oops, I keep hitting the wrong key, my keyboard, in my terminal, and then run that again. And now I'll come over here and I will test just that root first of all, and that seems to be working. And now I'll add the /goodbye. And not only did it work, but you can see that the tags were interpreted correctly by my web browser. So I've shown a couple different things we can do with routing. I can route multiple URLs to one function. I can have multiple functions that receive different URLs. And that gives us a lot of options. And again, to the user, it's going to look like you've got all these different web pages, but they're really just different functions that are getting called based on where the user goes. The frustrating thing I've run into already is that I have to keep exiting and launching my my web server every time, and that gets a little bit old. So let's see if we can do some things to smooth that part out. Let's close it for now. I'm going to open my Explorer here. I'm going to point out that my file is called hello.py. And so when we run our web server, and when we run Flask, I have to keep specifying that file name. Well, I can also change that name to just be called app.py, and that's kind of the default name. And so now, in my terminal, I just need to say Flask run, and that gets it running. That's slightly better. It's also problematic if you have a bunch of different apps running on your in one folder or whatever. But as a rule, now what we do is when we have one project, our main app, we're going to call app.py so that we can run it easily. It's kind of the default name by convention. Let's go ahead and stop that from running. One other thing we can do that's useful from the command line here is if I say Flask run and I add on to that --debug, now I'm running in debugger mode, and you can see that indicated here. And so here's what this does. If I come over here and I refresh, everything's working fine. If I update my code at all, so instead of H2, I'm just going to make that a regular paragraph, and I save it, you can see it says here it detected a change, so it's reloading. When you're running it with the debugger, it keeps an eye on your files, and anytime they change, it shuts down automatically and starts back up. So now I can just come over here and hit refresh, and you can see that Have a Nice Day now is back to being a paragraph instead of a headline too. So we're getting better. We're starting to save ourselves a little bit of work, but we'll save for last the real helpful tip here for this. Let's go ahead and close that one more time. And that is much like when we first started learning about packages and modules and stuff, we had this if statement, if dunder name equals dunder main, meaning if we're actually running this script and not just kind of importing it, then what we can do is we can refer to that app object that I've created, app.run. I'll save that. And now, instead of using the command line, I'm just going to hit my run button up there, and sure enough, it has run it. Now, it did run it in regular mode. It has the debugger turned off. You can see debug mode is off. So let's Control C and exit out of that. But we can give the run method a parameter, debug equals true. Save that, hit run. And now it's running in debugger mode. I can come back here and I can instead make that, or I can add a bold tag. Bold is deprecated, I think. I'm probably not supposed to use that anymore. I'm supposed to use emphasis or something like that. But I save that. It recognizes that it's updated. I'll come over here, refresh. I can see that it's bolded now. Strong, I think, is the tag I'm supposed to use there. Sorry, I'm not much of a web developer. But at any rate, what I've accomplished here with this if statement is now this runs whenever I click the run button that's built into Visual Studio Code, and I don't have to deal with the command line running that command each time. I still might want to have that terminal open so that I can see what's going on and I can see if there's requests that I didn't expect or something like that. But it does make the workflow that much easier. That's about as far as I want to take just this basic kind of hello world app. We're not really able to, there's little things we could still learn from here, but this idea of returning a string and having that be our web page, that's really limiting how much we can get done. So this is a good place to stop and collect up our thoughts, make sure you are able to do this much, and then we'll move on to learning how to render some actual HTML pages. Reach out if you have any questions.